Okay. Are you guys ready? So today we're going to be learning about the Greek verb, specifically the present active indicative. But to understand the Greek verb, there's going to be a few things we got to cover. By a few, that's actually a lot, because there's a few differences from English and Greek. I put a quote on here from Martin Luther, and he says, "Biblical languages are the sheath which hides the sword of the Spirit. So although the faith of the gospel may be proclaimed by a preacher without the knowledge of the languages, the preaching will be feeble and ineffective. But where the languages are studied, the proclamation will be fresh and powerful. The scriptures will be searched, and a faith will be constantly rediscovered through ever new words and deeds." And I like the very first sentence when he says the languages are the sheath which hides the sword of the Spirit. And by that, what I'm saying, or I agree with it in a sense, is that there's a few things in English that the Greek language doesn't really cross over. For example, structure, certain words, how everything kind of fits together, the syntax, and ultimately every translation is an interpretation. So I'll say that again. Every translation is an interpretation because the issue behind it is Greek words have multiple meanings. It's kind of like English in one sense, like the word cool. It could be mean as a cool day outside, or that's some cool glasses over there, you name it. But there's a couple different meanings there. And the only way you can truly understand what the meaning of the word is the context surrounding it. And so in English translation, you're basically relying on the editor or the translator in terms of understanding what that passage is meaning in one sense. I mean, usually the translations nowadays try to be as, what's the word? Literal in a sense as possible, or word for word, or some type of correlation to how the Greek is laid out. But ultimately, every translation requires an interpretation, and just know that when you have an interpretation, you're reading it through basically a lens, in one sense. So yeah. Any questions on that before we go in? Okay, so if you turn to what page is it? Page 11, there we go. No page number. But chapter 2, the very first page, we get to see our vocabulary words. So these are one thing I would like you to at least try to remember. But right now we're just going to go say it together, okay? The first one is ago, which means I lead. Second one is akuo, I hear. Blepo, yeah, which is I see. Gnosko, which is I know. Grapho, didasco, or didasco, I should say. Didasco. Egero, I raise up. You don't have to say that part. Echo. I will say echo is going to be a hard word, just so you know, in one sense. It's easy. It comes up often, but there's some changes that makes it hard to recognize sometimes. Lambano, I take, I receive. Lego, kind of like Legos, but not. That means I say. Luo, I loose, I destroy. And this is going to be our key word that we're going to be learning all of our paradigms through. And the reason why is because it consists of most of them. Mathano, I learn. And this actually comes from the root word math, which we get our word mathematics from, or math. Pimpo, I send. And Pharaoh, I bear or I bring. So those are the words, yes?
They all end in omega, so when there's a tense change, does that change the ending?
Correct. So everything in a dictionary, you name it, it's going to be in the present active indicative first person singular. Just how it's going to show up. In the, it's actually not going to be always active either. It could be middle. But when you look up in a dictionary, this is the form that you're going to see it in. Just so you know. And present active indicative first singular is what we're going to be learning today, so you're going to figure that out if you don't know what that is. Anything else? So before we can jump into the Greek verb, we need to understand some basic grammar. And again, I think I said it last time, the hardest thing is, or most translation problems I should say, is actually our English problems. Now, if you don't know English, which I don't, I'm still learning English, it's going to be a constant problem. And there's just a few things you got to figure out on how to make it fit within the English language. It makes sense in the Greek if you're a Greek-speaking person, but in English, you got to make that change somehow, some way. Again, every translation is an interpretation. So some basic things that we're going to learn is the sentence level. So what makes a sentence? I have it up here. You can shout it out if you want to.
Subject and predicate.
There you go, subject and predicate. And what is the subject? Huh? Subject? The topic of the clause, thank you. Yes, it's basically the one that the clause is all about. And then you have the predicate, which is basically anything that is basically talking about that subject. Does that make sense? So that's the basic level of a sentence. You have the subject and the predicate. So a predicate also is whatever is asserted or denied of the subject. So what he is, what he does, and whatever happens to him, whether he's suffering or not. And so example here is Tim kicked the ball. What is the subject? Tim? Tim kicked the ball? Subject is the ball? Is that your final guess? No, the subject is Tim. Okay? I'm going to use S for subject. Yes. Kicked is what? And I know we're talking about predicate, but what exactly is it's action verb? Yes. So verb. Okay? And the ball is the object. Yeah. Oh, that's a bad O. So the verb and object here are the predicate, right? Got it? Everyone on the same page? I got to see some head shaking before I move on. Okay.
Guys, when I taught you guys about biblical interpretation, we went over this. I realize it's been a while. But
Yes.
we went over this exact thing.
I'm almost positive I bought this.
So now
I know how to do it this time.
we're going to do the next sentence. Ready?
Yes.
Yes. The ball which Tim kicked ended up in a tree. Now, this is a little bit more a complex sentence, so let's see if we can all get it. So what is the subject? The ball. Now, I'm going to just lump this which Tim kicked. Do you know what this type of clause is?
It starts with an R.
Yes, it does start with R. Relative clause. Man, it's hard to write like this. Ended up. You know what this is? It is a verb, but so it's a verb, and it's not a prepositional phrase. Are you talking about the up part? as preposition? I should clarify. No, in a tree is a prepositional phrase. You're right.
One underlined, so I thought.
Yeah, sorry. I'm still talking about ended up. Sorry. Yeah, it is a prep phrase.
Is up an adverb?
It's a particle. Yeah, so ended up. Verb plus particle. So it's a complex verb. So now, what would you say the predicate is of this? Yes, correct. That is the whole predicate. Which Tim kicked ended up in a tree. Because all of this is describing or talking about the subject right here. So there we go. We got the basic understanding of what a sentence is. I try to make it as simple as possible. So hopefully that was easy to understand, right? Good. Any questions on that? Because this is really important when it comes to translating. Good? Okay. And also, there's a difference between verbs that I used here, which, as we are about to learn, is the idea of transitive and intransitive verbs. Have you heard that phrase before? Yes? Okay. What is a transitive verb? Let's see.
The subject doing something.
Yeah, so basically, the best way to remember it is that the transitive verb is going to have an object, a direct object. Whereas an intransitive verb will not have a direct object, and most likely the intransitive verb is going to basically express a state of being instead of the action involved. So, for example, Tim kicked the ball. Kicked here is a transitive verb, yes. I almost said it like you did, transitive. and the ball which Tim kicked ended up in a tree. Ended up here would be a intransitive. You know why? Say again?
It doesn't end up in anything.
Yeah, it's stating the state of which the ball is in, and there's no object. It's just a prepositional phrase. So that's that. Any questions on transitive, intransitive? Because that's somewhat important when it comes to translating verbs and knowing.
One question. There's so basically like a predicate adjective at the end. So you would sort of have like linking verbs in the middle. What's that normally considered? What form is that normally considered transitive or intransitive?
I'd have to see an example of sentence.
Is red or something.
The ball is red. That would be an intransitive.
Okay.
So the is a to be verb. So it's a state of yeah. So it's basically saying the ball is something, the state of being. Yeah. Okay. Next, we need to understand the types of clauses. You have a main clause or independent clause, however you want to call it, versus a subordinate or dependent clause. I usually like to use one or the other. So as long as you understand the difference between independent, dependent, and main and subordinate. So a clause is a grammatical instruction normally consisting of subject and predicate. When there are more than one clause in a sentence, it is broken down into two categories, main and subordinate. The main clause is that clause in a sentence which could stand alone as a complete sentence. And that's really the main thing, is a main clause can stand alone, doesn't need anything else. Whereas a subordinate clause or dependent clause requires information. So if I just said ended up in a tree, you're like, well, what ended up in a tree? So this by itself wouldn't make sense. But if you add a whole sentence attached to it to help clarify that, then it would, depending on the sentence structure, of course, that would be dependent by itself. But this is not really an example of that. And usually relative clauses are not, I guess they could be dependent, depending on how you want to classify, but they usually are their own classification for another reason. But depending on the grammar that you use, honestly, when I was looking this up, different grammars say different things. Next, that is important, is word order. So English word order is subject, verb, object, and this is really easy to demonstrate. Because if I said, ball Tim kicked, you wouldn't understand very well, would you? No, but if I said the ball kicked Tim, would that make sense? Kind of, yeah. But linguistically, it wouldn't make sense because a ball is an inanimate object. It can't really kick. But you understand that because ball is fronted and at the very beginning of the sentence, it acts as a subject. So English is, like I said, is a subject, verb, object construction. Unless, of course, see, then there's a difference to that. But there's exceptions, I should say. But those are usually done for emphasis or maybe answering a question. There's a whole bunch of other ways that breaks the subject, verb, object. So in Greek, you will find that the Greek word order is sometimes confusing because the verb could be at the end, it could be at the beginning, the subject could be actually all the way at the end, and you're just like translating all the stuff. He's like, what is all this? And you see the subject, you're like, okay, this is weird. But primarily, the Greek verb or word order is verb object or verb subject object. Yeah. So we're going to learn that the verb can actually contain the subject, whereas English does not have that. And the reason why is because there's inflection within the verbs. Other languages... Huh?
Like the words that we read at
Yes.
the beginning of the chapter.
Yeah, so the omega at the end basically is the I. I'll go would be I lead, basically. Yeah. So when you have this verb object or verb subject object down in mind, and then when you are translating, you see something out of place, or maybe it doesn't. Something's not in this order, I should say. It's for a couple of different reasons, which we'll learn later. It could be for emphasis, be contrasting items, showing verity. I mean, there's a few other things. If there's an article involved, like the word the, sometimes it'll be the with a whole bunch of stuff, and then you'll have the what the word the is attached to, the noun that it's attached to. Well, all that is doing is basically all the stuff in between is talking about what that noun is talking about. We'll talk about that later when we get to nouns. Yeah, it's kind of like adjective, but it's not. And then there's poetry, like things that can cause the order to be out of place. I can't think of anything off the top of my head. Maybe Philippians 2 and with the Christ hymn, but I could be wrong without looking at it. So yeah. We all understand the Greek, basically some basic grammar? Yeah? Okay. So now we're going to start diving into the verb system. So to understand the Greek language, the student must master the verb. This is straight out of your book, I believe on page 12. Yeah. That tells you how far we've gotten in all this. Yeah. So to understand the Greek language, the student must master the verb system. And the reason why is because the verb is a word that expresses action or state of being. It's the one that makes a complete sentence out of the whole entire thing, any clause structure, basically, unless if it's a nominal clause, which means it's no verb, it's just nouns or adjectives. So because the verb is so important, it's usually the first thing you want to try to find when it comes to translating. And as you're coming to translating, one thing you have to start asking or formulating in your own mind is a translation philosophy. The question would be do you want to be as word for word as possible, or do you want to have some paraphrasing going along in there? And the reason why I would argue that it's based off purpose. What's the purpose of your translation? And the reason being is if your purpose of translating is to allow other people to study that passage, I would probably prefer a more word for word, as close as possible correspondence when you're translating. However, for your own personal time, I would recommend trying to paraphrase it. And the reason why is because it'll help you understand the meaning of the passage that you're translating. You're able to reword it in your own words and be able to, in a sense, grasp it better, in my opinion. But ultimately, you have to explain it. It's your own philosophy, however you want to do it. Some people want to dot the I's and dot the T's, or put the crosses through the T's, whatever, just because they want to be as close to Scripture as possible. But again, it's just your own translation philosophy. Again, make the verb your starting point when you translate a sentence in the exercise or a verse in the Greek text. I would recommend at least writing that, underlining that part, just to make the verb your starting point. And again, the verb is usually the key word in any sentence, and the other parts of the speech in some way relate to the verb. That kind of explains why it's really important. Now we're going to get to the Greek. What makes the Greek verb? So the Greek verb has tense, voice, mood, person, and number. This is going to be somewhat unique if you have not learned another language like Spanish, Latin, or something like that. So if you know English English, then this is going to be somewhat new to you. So today we're going to begin with tense. The tenses in Greek are right here. There's really 6 of them, but sometimes you can you'll see future and future perfect. Well, ultimately that's just a future, but with the perfect. It's the 7th.
What is the 6th?
Oh, pluperfect. We'll learn. Trust me. So the tenses are: number 1 is present, 2 future, 3 imperfect. Who wants to try number 4, pronouncing it? No, aorist. Yeah, it's number 4 is aorist. Number 5 is perfect. Number 6 is pluperfect. Number 7 is future perfect. And today we're just going to be looking at the present tense. But before we kind of understand tenses, we have to understand the makeup of a tense. The background information of how it all works. This is probably going to be maybe the longest part in the whole thing. So in English, tense is usually understood in time. So past, present, future, so time of action. However, in Greek, it has the time of action, but it has a kind of action, which is also called verbal aspect. Again, I'll say that again. It has time of action, but it also has kind of action, which is also verbal aspect. However, the kind of action, the verbal aspect, actually has a greater significance and influence than the time of action. Does that make sense to anyone? Sounds. We'll get to it, okay? So in Greek, there's 3 types of verbal aspect or kind of action. I will call it from now on verbal aspect, unless someone wants me to say kind of action. So the first one is progressive aspect or action. This is also called linear or continuous action. It describes action that is in progress. The example is, he is believing the word of God. It focuses on the process of the action and can also refer to action that is repeated or habitual in nature. So the best way to understand this, if you were to put this on a timeline, it would just be like a line, just continuing on. It's just, if I say I am walking or I walk, in Greek it's just basically, that's what I'm doing in the present. I'm walking. And also it has the habitual aspect to it, or continuation aspect to it, where depending on context, you could say I walk, and that is something I am going to be habitually doing from that point on, if that makes sense. So I think a good example is the idea of striving for something, striving for holiness, for example. Well, if strive was in the present tense, you could say, I am going to do this day by day, from this point on. It's just showing there's a habitual, practical, something that you practice day by day. Does that make sense? Okay. The next one is summary aspect. I like to call it aorist aspect, but just because the book has summary and something you refer to, we'll just do summary. This can be called simple or undefined action. So basically the main idea is that it just says something. So if you were to put on a timeline, it would just be a big O dot like that. Like if I said I walk, well, I'm not telling you when, I'm not telling you why or anything like that. It's not talking about the process or the results. It's just saying I walked. Everyone understand that part? Okay. Number 3 is perfected or perfective aspect. And this describes the action as having been completed in the past with the results of the action continuing into the present. So the example here is, he has believed the word of God. Well, because it is in the perfect tense, it's going to be not only he believed at one point, but that believing is going to continue on into the future. So there's results that are coming up to even to present. So like it says here, the action took place in the past and the results of that action continue in the present. That is, at the time of speaking or writing, he is still believing the word of God. Any questions on those 3? Because these 3 are different, are unique to an English-speaking person. Got it? Okay. So today, we're going to be primarily focusing on progressive action. I will be hitting the other ones. If you could underline anything, it would be underlining it focuses on the process of the action and can also refer to action that is repeated or habitual in nature. And you can look at page 13 for that. Now, the second thing you need to know about tenses, yes, there's a lot of things you got to learn, that they are broken up into 2 classes or categories. The first one is primary or primary tenses, and they express things that happen in the present and future time. And then there is the secondary tenses that express time in the past. I don't believe the book actually talks about this, so you might want to just recognize that there's 2 different types of tenses.
It does.
It does? Okay, good. But does it say that present, future, and perfect are part of the primary?
Yes.
It does? And does it say imperfect, aorist, and pluperfect are part of secondary?
Imperfect, aorist, and pluperfect,
Yep, okay, good. I wasn't 100% sure. I should double check on that. But yes, so I didn't really like the order of how they did that in the book, so I'm doing it a little differently. So yeah, so just understand that there's 2 classes. So the question is, how does this all fit together? You have the classes of tenses, you have the verbal aspect, you have the time of action, and we need to understand how it all fits. Well, if you look at the handout I gave you, it's also the bottom chart up here. It kind of helps you see this. So if you look at the top line, on the left side it says kind of action, and then on the top it says time of action, and we see the past, present, future. Well, under kind of action it says progressive aspect. Well, within time, within the time of action, under the past you'll see imperfect tense, which we're not really covering today, but it says, if you were to translate it, it would be I was loving. In the present tense, or under present time, in the present tense, it would be I am loving. And in the future time, with the future tense, it will be I will be loving. Does that make sense to everyone? let's do the next line. Summary aspect, aorist would be I loved. In the present tense or present time in the present tense, it's I love. So you'll notice that since we're talking about present today, that there's a present tense in progressive aspect, and there is a present tense in summary aspect. So how would you distinguish those when it comes to translating? See if anyone can guess it right. Context. So the most important thing there ever is in translating is context. Context, context, context. I mean, you can say it with me. Context, context, context. You want to try to say it with me? Context, context, context. So yeah, the reason why I'm saying that is because it's very important. Context is very important. So just because you're translating something in the present tense doesn't mean it's going to be continuous or habitual aspect. It could also just mean, I love, I walk. It's not something that's continuing on. It's just stating something in time. Any questions on that? So if you ever read a commentary or hear something in the sermon and they'll say this is in the present tense, so it must mean something like continuing on. Well, now you can know let me look at the context. Is this even right? And ultimately, it's going to be up to your own decision on that. So the next part after tense, actually, does anyone have any questions on tense in general before I move on? Okay. So next part of the Greek verb is voice. And voice is the quality of a verb that indicates the relationship of the subject of the verb to the action of the verb. The easiest way to put this is voice is divided into three different categories. You have the active voice, which is right here. And the active voice is basically the subject acting on something. He's basically performing the action. Whereas passive is that the subject is being acted upon, or the action, some type of performance is being acted upon him. And we're not really, middle is actually the most unique one. It's actually not in the English language, but the idea is that the subject is not only acting on something, but it's also being acted upon at the same exact time. And there's three different categories for the middle, but we'll talk about that later. However, the main thing I want you to know about is the active and passive voice. As you can see in the present tense, if we're going to use the word I love, the present tense in the active voice would be I love or I am loving, depending on context. And the passive would be I am being loved. Future tense would be I will love or I will be loving. And passive is I will be loved. Does that make sense? So this is a good little handy dandy thing that you can put in your pocket and refer to whenever you're translating. It's just a good go-to resource as a chart. That's why I gave it to you. I didn't really see anything in the book that was helpful in that sense. But yeah. Any questions on the voice before we move on to the mood? Okay. So mood describes the manner in which the action or state of being expressed by the verb is conceived by the speaker or writer, whether as fact, assumption, wish, command, and so on and so forth. So even though your book says there's 4, there's actually 5. I don't know why they said 4, but there's 5. Infinitive. Unless they just don't classify as mood, but it should be. So you have an indicative, subjunctive, we'll add infinitive right there, optative, and imperative. So today we're just primarily going to be covering the indicative mood, but just so you have a general understanding of what these other ones are. So the subjunctive is basically a possibility. I may do something, I might do something. It's not necessarily, or this may happen, or might happen. The optative would be a polite way of asking or requesting something. So, may I please have this? May I do this, please? And the imperative is a command. Do this, don't do this. And the infinitive is basically having a verb without a subject. So to be or not to be, to have or not to have. You're just basically writing without a subject. But today we're doing the indicative mood, and this is a mood of assertion. It asserts that the action is taking place. The indicative can be also used to ask a question, since a question expects an assertion to be made in reply. The action expressed by the verb may or may not actually be occurring. The speaker is simply asserting it to be so. So in other words, it's just saying this is happening or this has happened, if that makes sense. It's not saying if it's factually right. It's not saying if it's true. It's just saying this. Any questions on that? By the way, this is a very important mood to understand because majority of the verbs are in the indicative mood within the New Testament. Everyone good to go? You good, Josh? Okay. So next is person. So the person is the quality of the verb that indicates whether the subject is speaking, being spoken to, or being spoken about. And if there's anything I want you to memorize out of this is 1, 2, 3. First person, second person, third person. The best way to see it is if I am speaking, so I'm the one, first person, I'm the one speaking. But if I am speaking to you, you're the one being spoken to. And if she is the one, if I'm speaking about or speaking to, well, yeah, I'm speaking about, she over there, or he over there, or y'all. Anyway, y'all would actually be second person, by the way, plural. Anyway, person in Greek is the same as English, but just remember 1, 2, 3. Number is not 1, 2, 3. I know it's number, but it's not 1, 2, 3. Just remember, number is not 1, 2, 3. Number is singular or plural, S or P. Just so you know, singular is just one person. He, she, I, you. Whereas plural would be they, we, or you all, y'all. Any questions on that? So English doesn't really have tenses, so it's just saying when it says I do this, it's just taking the I and the do together as it's and making it the same. Or we do this, if that makes sense. So if you turn to page 15, we're going to look at the paradigm of luo. Luo. You want to say it with me? Luo. Let's do the next one. Lues. Next one after that is lue. Going to the plural side, luamen, luete, luusin. It's just like Spanish. just like Spanish. So if you know Spanish, this will help you. Except for the endings will be different.
It functions very similarly to Spanish and Portuguese.
Yeah. So, luo is I loose, so I am loosing. And this is going to be first person singular. So if you want to write right here, you can do first, second, third, right here. So you can just know that that's what those lines are on going that way, or the rows or whatever they are. Columns would be up and down, so yeah, rows would be left to right. So let's just say them again. Luo, lues, lue, luamen, luete, luusi, or luusin. Now you'll notice that there's a nu in brackets here. This is called a movable nu. And the idea is when there is, if it's at the end of a sentence or there is a vowel that begins the next word, they usually put the nu in there. So the same thing happens in English. You don't say a apple. You say an apple, right? But you will say a ball. But you wouldn't say an ball. Make sense? However, the nu can be there even if there is not a vowel or at the end of a sentence. Sometimes the writers just choose to keep that there, whether or not there is those two rules. So for homework-wise, I'm going to ask you to memorize this paradigm. Luo, lues, lue, luamen, luete, and luusi, or luusin.
The first three are just like Spanish instances.
Huh?
The first three are like Spanish instances.
Yeah, for now. So for practice, we'll just do luo. Can't write. So we're going to kind of combine a couple different things in one, so hopefully it's not too complicated. But as you know, we're learning about the present active indicative. So it's the present tense, active voice, and the indicative mood. Okay? If you want to write this down, go for it. It might help you. It might not. I don't know. And so the main thing we got to learn here is the person and number. So right here is luo. So the best way to kind of understand this is the breaking up the word. So I'm going to use a different color. So we know that if you look at your paradigm chart on page 15, you'll see there's a commonality in all those words. You know what that commonality is? Lu, right? Well, there you go. Boom. You got a line right between lu and o. The lu here is going to be the lexical morpheme. Okay? It's good to at least understand this because you'll be able to break apart any Greek word and actually get to the point where you can almost guess what the word means. Because there's some words that take the same root word here, the lexical form, lexical morpheme, that will help you grasp the meaning of words as you continue on. And the omega, I should say, is the person number suffix. So P in suffix. Okay? And as you hopefully wrote down the 1, 2, 3 next to the luo, lues, and lue, you'll understand that luo is going to be first person, and it's going to be singular. Okay? So if you were to parse this, and parsing just means dividing the word up. So right now we're just covering present active indicative, so you don't have to worry about that at the moment. but it's going to be first person singular. And it comes from lu o. That's the source. So the source will always be the present active indicative first person singular unless the word only comes in the middle. And we'll talk about that later. Any questions on that before we practice another one? Okay. Erase. And let's try a different one, shall we? Let's do lu amen. Okay, so lu amen. Now you'll notice that there's an extra character in here. Well, actually, you don't notice that there's an extra character in here, but if you, but there is an extra character in here. It's going to be more noticeable when there is a vowel, I believe. I don't know if he talks about that. Hold on one second. No, he doesn't. Okay. So if you were to divide this word up, it would be like this. So you'll have the lexical morpheme, and this right here is a neutral morpheme. So you just put like a little number sign or something like that, whatever's easy, showing that this is just a thing that's making it sound better. And the reason why is because I believe, if I remember right, it's the vowel and the mu here. To make it sound better, they apply a morpheme here. Just to make it sound better. So instead of lumen, it's luamen. So it's basically for phonologic, whatever, good sounding purposes. And then this would be the person, the min is going to be the person number suffix. Huh?
It's going to be one first person.
It would be first. You know what the number is? So if you look at the plural, yeah. So this would be present active indicative first plural. Now, the lu ete is also going to have a neutral morpheme, and that's going to be the epsilon. So the lu would be the lexical morpheme, the epsilon is going to be the neutral morpheme, and the te is going to be the person number morpheme. Yes?
So would other verbs not have the other omicron and epsilon?
Yeah, they will not have that. It's usually only the min and te is going to have these. So the min, because it has a mu, is going to have the omicron, and the te, because of the tau, is going to have the epsilon. Not all verbs are going to have the omicron and epsilon, but this is the primary way you're going to see it. Okay? Now that's the reason why I call them the neutral morpheme, because not all verbs are going to have it. And I'll have to get that rule one more time, because it's racing not on my mind. So yeah, the luete, is going to be a second plural for the person number. Just for, see how, well, if we can do this, if we look at you might want to stay on your page, but if I use our vocabulary words, see if we can parse one out by ourselves. Ready? Blepe. What would be the So only those two that I showed you have the min and the te are going to have the neutral morpheme, just so you know.
What is the last letter?
Iota. So let's see if we can divide this up together. So if you look at page, 11? You'll see one word on here that starts with beta. Yeah, so this is gonna be how it's gonna be. You're gonna see some differences coming out of words because of what is called inflection, or inflection. So if we were to divide this word up, we would put a line right there. Then how would we? So what would be the actually lexical morpheme? Blep. Yep. And what would the A at the end be? If you can look on page 15.
Person number sequence.
Yes. And what is that?
Singular third person.
Yes. So how would you translate that? Instead of I see it, it's what? Instead of I see, what is it? Not you.
They see.
Not they. It's singular. He, she, it sees. Yes. So it's, depending on context, this depends on if it's going to be a she or an it. But generally it's going to be a he because it is a masculine priority type language. So basically most things that you see are going to be he unless context otherwise says otherwise. Same goes with nouns and everything. It's not sexist or anything, it's just how the language works. You can almost say it's a patriarchal language. Okay, anyone have any questions on that? So it's, how would you translate this again? Blep A. You want to say it with me? Blep A. And we know blep is C. A is single. I did that backwards. Look at that. See, this is what you don't do. Numbers are not numbers. Third singular. So third person is what? He, she, it. We'll just say he for now to make it easy. So he and singular is one person, right? So instead of I see, this is he sees. Yeah. Is that easy? Let's do some more. Okay, let's do There you go. Let's do that. Let's pronounce this together. Phares. Okay. Now let's figure out what the lexical. Where's the divide in the morphemes? After the row. Good job. And the lexical morpheme would be. Huh? Fair. Yeah, it's not a there. It's a phi, not a theta. Yeah. Page 15 is going to be where your, or you can get the very last page. I don't know if the paradigm sheet. You can also use that too, if you don't want to flip back before. But pharaoh is I bear, but phares is you. Anyway, what's the lexical morpheme? It would be the fair, right? Okay. And the ace is what? I know we know the person, number, suffix, but what is it? Based off page 15.
It'd be second person singular.
Second person singular, yes. So second person singular is a, how would you put that in English? Instead of I bear, it's you bear. Pretty easy. Let's do one more. Oops, I don't like that. Do I want to do Lego? Let's do that. So where would you divide this one up? So if you look on page 11, it'll say Lego. But if you take the omega off, after the gamma, yeah. So this is going to be your lexical morpheme, and this is going to be one whole person, number, suffix. And which one is that one? Third person plural. So instead of I say or I speak, it's they speak. Yeah. Everyone get that? Any questions? You want to do some more examples? Yeah? Okay. Yeah.
Somebody doesn't want to.
um,
I'm with Bell on this one.
Your favorite game works.
I'm sorry. So this is from Labano. And where would you initially divide this one up? After the noon, correct. And then, is there anything other divides in this one? After the epsilon, yeah. The first epsilon, yep. Yeah, so this one would be the lexical morpheme, and this one's going to be the neutral morpheme, and this one's going to be the person, number, suffix. And what is this person, number, suffix? Second plural. So instead of saying I take or I receive, it's y'all take. Yeah. So in English, you don't have to actually, you can just say you. You acts as both. Yeah. Yes?
How do you know when the epsilon is a neutral morpheme?
Basically, if you see the te at the end, and once you start knowing words, it's makes. So basically, te, to make it sound better, they add a neutral morpheme.
Yeah, but I mean,
I'm pretty
you just kind of learn that by becoming familiar with it. How do you know which?
Yeah. So basically, you're gonna know what verbs are by looking at them, and you're gonna see the endings. You're gonna memorize these endings, and it's basically the only thing that's gonna have this ending is this kind of type of verb. So when you see this, it's like, okay, boom, and I see the epsilon there, boom. So this is going to be my lexical morpheme, and then all I basically have to do is add a omega at the end. There's going to be a couple of words that's going to have exceptions to that. They're called contract verbs, which basically will have another omicron or epsilon that will be added to the source of the word. But for the purpose of this, I'm pretty sure it's only there for phonological reasons.
So pretty much any time the lexical
Yes. But the only way you're going to really see it is by the min and te at the end. So if you look at your paradigm column under plural, you'll see lua min and lua te. So you're only going to see those omicron and epsilon on those endings, which will actually help you when you get to participle passes, because they're going to have a min in there, but it's going to be in the middle of the word. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Let's just quickly go over these 7 points under 2.11 under the paradigm sheet. So number one, the present active indicative endings are the primary active tense endings. So you will see these again. 2, the stem is the part of the verb that remains unchanged and to which the personal endings are added. So the stem is basically what I call the lexical morpheme. I say lexical morpheme because lexical is the meaning of the word. And so the lexical morpheme is going to help you understand what the meaning is. So blepo is, I see, but the blep part is what's triggering the meaning behind it, if that makes sense. That's why I call it a lexical morpheme. So yeah, that's that. Number 3, in English, a noun or personal pronoun, I, we, etc., is needed to indicate the subject of a verb. I am loosing. The man is loosing. Otherwise, the subject of the verb would remain or would be uncertain. In Greek, no express subject is needed because the ending of the verb, called the person number suffix, even though it's in here, personal ending, itself singles out the subject. So again, the verb contains the subject. So that's why I said when we were talking about the word order, it could be a verb, object, word order. You don't have to have the subject there. But if there is a subject, it'll usually be after the verb. And if it's not after the verb, let's say it's before the verb, then that's mainly there for emphasis. Number 4, a verb must agree with its subject in person and number. Now, this is very important. If there is a subject, the verb must agree in person and number. That's one thing I probably should kind of make sure you know. So if there's a subject next to a verb, it's going, and right now we haven't gotten down to the nouns yet, so we're not going to get the subjects just yet. And the only exception to this rule would be proper nouns, so names, basically. Okay, names don't always have inflections. They don't always have when we learn the cases, so there's different cases. There's nominative, this is the subject, the accusative, which means this is the object, and there's other ones, dative, which is like to something or in something, depending on the noun. But when we learn those, the person number to the nominative would need to match the verb. So when we learn about nouns, we'll get to that. I think the English example would be, we would not say the man are reading a book, but the man is reading a book, if that makes sense. Or the men is reading a book, but you say the men are reading a book. The to be verb is and are. Number 5, English makes no distinction between a second person singular and the second person plural, which is the you. Now, you are loosing, and this is where English translations, it's helpful to look at the Greek, because a lot of English translations will just say you. But there are cases where it's like it'll be you plural, and that's going to actually change the meaning of the passage. You'll have all these I, but then you'll have a you plural somewhere in there. Well, that just changed the meaning of the whole entire passage. Or not you singular, so you singular, or something like that, but then you plural. So it's changing. Anyway, if I find an example, I'll show it to you. So it's very important to understand that Greek separates that, whereas English it does not. It used to. You know, you had thee, thou, thy, whatever, but not anymore. 6, accent in verbs is recessive and will move as far towards the beginning of the word as possible, unless there's 2 vowels at the beginning, and that would be the second vowel. Number 7, the nu, which is what I told you earlier in the third person plural, usi or usin. The nu is a movable nu and is often added to third person plural forms of the present active indicative. Really, the main thing you need to know is if it's at the end of a sentence, it's going to be there, or if the next word begins with vowel. Vowel, yeah. However, sometimes it's just there, just so you know. If you want to memorize anything, just memorize the paradigm with the nu at the end of usin. That's the best way to do it. You will never fail. Okay, that's that. And let's do our vocabulary words one more time. So we have ago, which is I lead. Akuo, I hear. Blepo, I see. Ginosko, I know. Grapho, I write. Didasco, I teach. Egero, I raise up. Echo, I have. Lambano, I take or I receive. Context will determine the meaning, remember that. Lego, I say, I speak. Luo, I loose, I destroy. Montano, I learn. Pimpo, you say tempo or pimpo? Pimpo, I send. Pharaoh, I bear. So just continue practicing pronunciation. It does take a little bit to get used to, and just recognize the words. As far as homework is concerned, actually, let's do number 1 on the translate the following verbs, shall we? Agase comes from ago. And if we were to break this up, we would put the dividing line for the morpheme-wise right after the gamma. So, og would be the lexical morpheme. Now you only need to give me what this is. So, agase would be what? What is ace? You singular. Yeah, well, second person singular, yes. And that, I mean, instead of I lead, it's no. You're making it past tense. It's present, and it's not no longer I anymore. It's what? You, yes, you led or lead, I should say, not led. Lead. Led is past tense.
Could that be like a command, or is there a different form for that?
There's a different form for a command. That's the imperative mood. So the indicative, 9 times out of 10, will not be a command. There's always exceptions to any grammatical rule, just so you know. Next one is akuo. And that is from akuo. And the dividing line, help you see that. You have aku, which is I hear. And omega at the end is what? First person singular, so akuo is I hear. Pretty easy? Okay, Number 2, blepe. We just did this one, I believe, right? Yeah. Let's see if we could do it again. Where would we divide the word? Blip, yep. And the A. And so blip would be IC, right? Or blepo would be IC. So blip would C. And the A is? So he sees. Yeah. So one thing that might help when you're doing this, so if you see like a, let's do number 3. Let's say you want to divide the word up. So you divide the word up, you look at your alphabet list and you see Pharaoh. And you know if you take the omega off, because that is the first person singular, so you just take that off and now you have Pharaoh. Well, you know Pharaoh is I bear, so you just put bear underneath that, and then you, under A, and we know that is what again? Third singular, yes. So that is a he. So you just write it out like that. That might help you just kind of get the grasp of it. So it would be bear he. To make it right, is this he bear.
So is that part B, or is that how we're supposed to do part A?
So we will do, right now I'm just showing you examples.
How to do part A?
Yeah. Yep.
Do number 1 like that, and we have to go back and do it.
No. I'm going to give you 2 and 4 for homework. Dealio? But if you want to do more, go for it. So yeah. And so if you were to look at Luis, you can put that little dividing line under, because we know Luo. Take the omega off, Lu, and we have now we're attaching ace at the end. So what is that? Lu is the lexical morpheme. Ace is the person number suffix. So ace is second singular. So Lu is loose, really tight in there. And ace is second singular. So that's you. So you loose. Pretty simple. So if you just circle 2 and 4, and that is the ones I would like you to try to translate. And for parsing, remember the what makes up the Greek verb tense. You have tense, voice, mood, person, number, and then you're also going to have source. So source would be the present active indicative of whatever verb it is. So if we look at gnoske, right here, the very first one, gnosko is I know, right? Pretty sure that's what it is. And so gnosko, take the omega off. We got gnosk, which is no, and we got the A, which is what? A is third singular. So we got third singular, so that is a he. So he knows, but if we're going to parse this out, we're going to say it is the present active indicative, because that's all we're learning right now. So every one of these should have PAI at least, as a minimum. Now, that's present is the tense, active is the voice, and indicative is the mood. Now we need person number. So we know it's third singular. Now we just need the source. The source word is gnosko. It could look something like that. Make sense? Any questions? So if you want to write it out, what you need, you need present, active, indicative, and you need person and number. Just know that this is tense, this is voice, this is mood, and you also need source at the very end. So if you just write these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 things, you're set as far as parsing is concerned. So if we do the next one on number 6 on the right, it's lu et te. We can divide that up because we got luo. And take the omega off, we got lu. And so now it's adding et te at the end. The epsilon is the neutral morpheme, and te is the person number suffix, and te is what? Second plural. See, you're already getting this down. Look at this. We just need to do this more often. And so we already know that the person number is second plural, and we are, because of where we are in our learning, it's this present active indicative. Boom. Now we just need the source, and the source is what? We got lexical morpheme is lu, and so the source is what? Luo. Good job. That's that. That's how you parse. So for you know what? Just for parsing's sake, just do the parsing on 2 and 4 on the translation part. Just make it easy, so you don't have to do part B. Deal? I give you that just so you can get practice, at least trying to do it. All right.
Sorry, we're parsing and translating the same.
Yeah, just make it easy. I'd rather you learn to do it at the same time than not, because that'll help you later. Does anyone have any questions? Now's the time to ask. You can always email me. No? Okay. So quick devotion. I just wanted to kind of show, this might be too big. Let's just zoom in a little bit. So I kind of wanted to show the importance of the Greek language, and especially the verb. Now, I didn't find one with the present active indicative, so you can forgive me. But boulamai right here is basically the word no. And as we learn through the whole... don't want that. I want that. There we go. So we learn all this. We're going to see that this whole entire paragraph right here, all the way down to verse 18, in Philippians 1, 12 through 18, is all based, all rooted in this one word right here. So this is a kind of a helpful thing to when you're studying God's Word and you want to understand why is the Greek verb so important. Well, because this whole entire paragraph is built off of this one verb. Now, when we learn the infinitive, we'll understand that some the infinitive can help the main word. So here, this is I want, and gnos. Oh, look at this. This is actually from gnosko. This is gnoskein. We know what gnosko is. And the ain right here at the end makes it an infinitive. An infinitive is just basically like a to be or to not to be type thing. So instead of I know, it's to know. So I want you to know, brothers. It's basically what he's saying here. And the whole entire paragraph is built off of that one phrase. So I kind of wanted to show you how important the Greek verb is. Does that make sense? I mean, all of this is built off that one thing. And then another thing I kind of want to help you see about just the learning Greek and why it's important is there's certain words here that can be translated, like, for example, so that. There's about 4 different words that can be translated as so that. But each one of those can mean something different. So this word is oste. Yeah, oste. And make sure the breathing mark wasn't there. So it means so that. However, oste is result. It is pointing out results. There's another one that's pointing out to purpose. There's another one that's pointing out to something that's done in the same manner. I'm just showing you examples. So the idea is when you understand these things, it's helping you see that there's results. And I broke out the results here. So what does Paul here want them to know? That my circumstances have come all the more to the progress of the gospel, so that, and the result is this, my chains are visible in Christ, to be made known in the whole praetorium, and to everyone else. And then there's this kai here, which means and. It's pointing to a second result. And not only does he want his brothers to know, or the Christians at Philippi to know this, but he also wants them to know this, and that the result of it, of what his circumstances, his chains have caused. And the second result is that the majority of brothers have become confident in the Lord by my imprisonment. Even more so, that they are bold enough to fearlessly speak the word. And then he kind of explains what this means. He's basically saying that is, some do it because of jealousy and strife. Others do it because of goodwill. They preach Christ. Some out of love, knowing that I am appointed for the defense of the gospel. Others out of selfishness proclaim Christ, not with pure motives, supposing to raise distress in my imprisonment. For what? Except in every way, whether in pretense or truth, Christ is being proclaimed. And this I rejoice. And what he's basically saying is, I want you to know that my circumstances has caused Christ to be proclaimed. And it doesn't matter what their motives are. Not at all. They could do it out of selfish reasons. They could do it because of jealousy and strife, or they could do it for good things, out of love, or so that others, out of goodwill. But the main thing is he cares about Christ being proclaimed. Now, it's kind of hard sometimes for us to say, can someone preach the gospel out of pure, unpure motives? But he's saying it's possible. And he's saying, as long as Christ is being proclaimed, that is the main importance of this. And you'll learn as you read Philippians that unity is one of the big key themes throughout the whole entire book. And the only really one main way to understand that is by learning Greek, because otherwise you're going to see the word joy come up a lot. And a lot of times joy is going to be one of the main priorities that a lot of commentators say. However, there's a few things throughout the letter that in the Greek language that helps you see that unity is actually the main focus of the whole entire letter. So that's one quick thing. And the second quick thing is out of Romans chapter 1, this kind of helps you see the importance of word order. This is going to be pretty quick. Anyway, I'm just going to read the first part, and then we can look at the second part. Let's see if I can zoom it in. But I do not want you to be ignorant, brothers and sisters, that many times I myself intended to come to you, and I have been prevented until this current moment, in order that I may have some fruit even in you, just as I also have in the rest of the nations. And then we get to this sentence in verse 14. Now, let's see if we can somewhat try to translate this, because some of these words are somewhat similar in English. So, 14, the very first one is helasin. Now, if you... Say again. Yeah. So, if, capital letters is going to be before. And the capitals here is also going to help you see that this is probably a proper name, or it's at the beginning of the whole entire letter. Usually everything else is in lowercase. So it's either proper name or it's pointing to the entity of people, basically. So helasin, have you ever heard of the Hellenistic speaking Jews or something like that? What does Hellenistic mean?
It's a Greek-speaking.
Greek-speaking. So helasin is actually Greek. This means Greek. Those who speak Greek. So what he's saying is that well, anyway, let's read this first. So Greeks, and they have actually two words that mean and, te and kai. The first one's going to be both. So it's fronted. So it's both Greek and barbaros. Barbarois. There we go. Barbarois. Can anyone guess what barbarois means? Kind of the first part sounds like it. Barbarian. There you go. So both, and this we're going to learn cases later, but this is in dative. So both two the Greek and to the barbarians, sophois, wisdom, so both wisdom, and anaetois, which is foolishness. Pretty sure I'm a debtor, or I am under obligation. There's another word for meaning for that. So, as you can see, this right here is at the very end. Okay, you have all this other information here, and he's basically making that right here emphatic. In other words, I am completely under obligation, however way you want to make it in English, to the Greek and the barbarians, to the wise and the foolish. And this kind of helps you see why word order is really important. And you may not necessarily see that in English because it's hard to sometimes make that emphatic. Does that make sense? So those are 2 quick devotions on why it's important to understand the Greek language and also understand word order in general. Any questions on that?
Just a question out of interest.
Yeah.
Based on how much you have translated, have you come to find a favorite current translation of the Bible because of how you've translated?
Again, that's going to be like, I guess if I had for studying wise, I would say the NASB. It's the closest thing, I think, to a word for word, for the most part, equivalent.
I'm interested in, as you've been going through Greek and translating,
Yeah.
but you're also studying different translations.
Yeah.
If there's one that you keep finding you agree with the most, basically.
I guess. So I actually take a more, I try to paraphrase it. So I woodenly translate it as much as possible, and then I retranslate it into a paraphrase. And that way I can understand it better. And so what I actually like to do is look at like the Message Bible or NLT, New Living Translation, anything that's been paraphrased, and see how they did it. And you can either agree or disagree type of thing. I think what's his name? Who did the Message Bible? Eugene Peterson. He actually, on some things, he actually makes really good points. But other things, like, I wouldn't do that way. So, but it's good to see it from different perspectives. And if you read commentaries, sometimes, depending if they're not text bound or translation bound, they usually write their own translation, and they are pretty good too. But it's good. It is good to compare your translation to other translations. But I personally would recommend trying to. Again, it goes down to purpose in your own philosophy, but to try to paraphrase it or learn how to paraphrase, just so it helps you understand and retain it. And then, because the main thing is meaning. If you can understand the meaning, you're able to meditate on it. You're able to pray through it. It's able to change your life. And really, learning Greek has changed the way I study the Bible, how I. And really made a lot of things, even simple things. Like, for example, the names of the Gospels. We call it the Gospel of Mark, Gospel of Matthew. Well, in the Greek, it's actually the Gospel according to Mark, the Gospel according to John, you name it. But the idea behind it is, when you say the Gospel of Mark, you're thinking, well, that's one Gospel. Gospel of John, that's another Gospel. Gospel of Matthew, Luke, you got 4 Gospels right there. Well, there's only really one Gospel, and these are all, it's the Gospel according to these people. So it's just simple things like that it's like little nuances that kind of like, oh, I should actually start doing that in my own self, because I think there's an impact not only to yourself but also to other people as you disciple and teach people. What else? And this, even stuff like this, seeing word order and how something like that just pops out at you. It's like, why is he putting this all the way at the end? There's a reason why he's putting that in, because he's like, look, I am doing all this. I'm under obligation to this. He's showing the importance of this. Now, in your online translation, you don't have to say I am completely, or whatever, however you want to make it emphatic. You can actually just underline it a couple times. And it's your own translation. You have more flexibility than relying on someone else. So there's so many things you could do. You can make it in bold if you want to. However you want to do it. Does that make sense? Any other questions? Pretty simple. So yeah, just for homework-wise, just the paradigm. Luo, lues, lue, luamen, luete, and luusin. You want to say it with me one more time? Luo, lues, lue, luamen, luete, luusin. Yeah, and then just that's what's going to be on the quiz, just letting you know. If you need help, I'll give you help. And I might do about 4 vocabulary words. And for those who need help, I can make it out of the first. I think there's only 14, so out of the first 7. How about that? Deal? Any questions? Well, John, would you like to close us in prayer?